Welcome. This is a spoiler review, so if you haven't been able to see Exit 8 quite yet, I would recommend that you do so, especially as, at least where I live, it's a relatively new release. If you have seen it though, or just don't really give a shit, let's move on, shall we? Directed by Genki Kawamura, Exit 8 is a psychological horror film based on the 2023 indie horror game of the same name. It follows who the film calls the Lost Man at a train station on the way to his temp job. However, he realizes that the hallway he walked into keeps repeating itself with no real way to progress until he finds these rules on the wall. Don't overlook any anomalies. If you find any anomalies, turn back immediately. Finally, if you don't find any anomalies, do not turn back. I'm gonna be honest, I was hoping to get a little more out of this one. I mean, the trailer honestly looked awesome, and it's what got me to actually bother playing the game. Hell, I was so hellbent on seeing this movie that after the theater chain I normally go to was not selling tickets to this film, despite the fact it said they were available, I went to a completely different one just to watch it. Now that I've actually seen it, I'll be honest, I'm more just impressed this was able to get made at all. Before going into it, I was kind of comparing it to Iron Lung in my head, as they were both films based on indie horror games. But at least with Iron Lung, there's some semblance of a narrative, even before all the lore updates. Exit 8, even now, has nothing. It's just a hallway with a guy walking down it that loops over and over again. No story, no characters. Hell, it doesn't even have a goddamn title screen. You're just dropped in. So I'll say that the fact they were able to get anything out of this is insane. But that doesn't mean I think it's amazing. In fact, I'm still kind of debating whether or not I liked it more or less than Iron Lung. First, I'll start off with the positives. I'll go into something I already thought was cool when the film starts. Its cinematography. See, this film is about a never-ending hallway and was a real set that was built. I thought maybe it would be the Iron Lung approach where because they obviously don't have a ton to work with, they need to get creative with the camera angles and shots. This film uses a technique that I didn't even think would work because of how hard it would be to do properly. This film has an absolute abundance of oneers, which I believe makes perfect sense for the vibe. I think the audience would see through it insanely quickly if they always just so happened to cut in front or behind the characters every time they rounded the corner. So, this film found clever ways to not only hide the cuts, but truly make you feel as if you're in this endless loop of a train station corridor. However, I'm not going to pretend like this film was shot entirely in one take. That's not true, and good luck planning around that. There are still plenty of edits, which I'll get into later. However, I noticed a method they'll use to try to hide cuts. Sometimes when the character's round the corner of where the set would loop, the camera lags behind and starts trucking along the wall so it can hide a cross dissolve. It was really subtle, and I honestly loved that I was able to notice it because some of them are pretty well hidden. It really emulates the game and is a real creative way to bring the game's feel into a medium where you'll obviously have no control over what the characters do. So if you have played the game, the cinematography brings you into a similar headspace. Another thing I'll commend is the acting. This is not a very large cast, which makes sense given the premise. It's mainly just Kazunari Ninomiya acting his ass off, especially in some of the more emotional scenes. Apparently, he helped with the script as he was a fan of the game this was based on, and it's cool to see this passion come through on the screen. I'll also say, I love how some of the anomalies were handled. Now, if you are familiar with the game, I'm sure you realize that they didn't show a good chunk of the ones from the game. Not only because some elements are different, like for example some of the posters are changed, but also because you realize they're working with certain limitations you only have when you're filming in live action, along with the fact I'm sure this had a pretty low budget. So, for example, you didn't have the posters slowly growing in size along the walls, but there were a few others I was kind of bummed we didn't see. Like, I wanted to see the tile guy, both hiding on the wall and peeking around the corner. Some of the other anomalies they adapt, I'm more just nitpicking if I have problems with them. I'm not going to start complaining because the Hobbit doorknob was on the second door in the film when it was the third in the game. I'm not that pedantic. Although something I did find amusing was that for the anomaly that made the lights yellow, rather than simply getting bulbs with a lower Kelvin, they just painted the fucking set yellow. I mean, I guess it works, but it really threw me off when I realized that. Now let's get into the negatives. I'll start off with the pacing. I'll say I'm glad this film was only 95 minutes. If you watched my Iron Lung review, you know one of, if not the biggest criticism of that film for me was its length and the way it was paced to accommodate it. See, I'm not even kidding when I say this film probably would have been way higher on my list if they cut out a very specific portion of the film. Because both The Lost Man and The Boy chapters are great, man, the Walking Man chapter really knocked this film down for me. Now, I'll say, I love the transition they do from present to past in a single shot. It's all through Yamato Kochi's performance of just being a blank, emotionless face, to all of a sudden showing excitement for not finding any anomalies. It really throws you off after him being emotionless all movie, and I'll say it worked. However, the rest of it... Look, I know I preach that it's okay to give your film moments where we're able to learn more about the characters that aren't attached to the immediate plot. But I don't really think we needed an explanation for the Walking Man. You don't get a concrete explanation on how this tunnel works, and that's by design. Yeah, there's a theory that it might be some form of purgatory that is sort of a punishment for someone's guilt, but again, it's never elaborated on, and that's by design. The fact the Walking Man has an explanation for why he's there just feels wrong to me. If you're gonna bother explaining one aspect of it, why leave it at that? Either it should all be mysterious, or it should not. Pick one. This falls even flatter on its head when we see that when he went through the corridors, there was a high school girl there. We never see what happened to her. We can assume she was also here and walked into the false exit. Why was this guy so important and she wasn't? Personally, this portion of the film felt entirely unnecessary, and everything established in it is also in the chapter about the boy. If this film either cut that bit out or shortened it significantly, this film would probably be at least a point higher. Again, I'm glad it's not 2 hours, but it's stuff like this that really highlights that turning a game that's designed to be beaten in at most an hour, unless you're stupid like I am and took 2 hours, into a feature-length film is extremely tricky. This is why I brought up in my Iron Lung review that indie horror games like this would make much better short film adaptations rather than feature-length ones, because you need to know what you're doing if you want to extend the runtime in a way that doesn't feel forced. Another negative I have with this film is its sporadic editing. I've made it no secret on this channel that editing is probably the thing I bring up the least in my videos, because it's not exactly something I consciously think about. I'm sure you can tell by the way this video is edited that it's not exactly my forte. However, because of this film's style of cinematography, it makes the cuts way more obvious and jarring. Now, I get that some of it is definitely by design, especially when it keeps cutting to the exit 8 sign. However, there are moments where the cuts feel completely unnecessary and just take me out of the film because of the visual language it's been trying to communicate with me. This is a very, very small negative. In fact, it's basically a nitpick. The anomaly with the face rats didn't look very good, and the poor quality of the effect didn't make me feel tense. I was more trying to hold back laughter because of how they looked. Honestly, like I said, I'm kinda disappointed by this one. I liked the game fine, but I was hoping the film would do something cool with it. But with its interesting yet clunky story structure, sporadic editing, and pacing that still feels off for a 90-minute film, its positives aren't enough to make me think this movie is anything more than just okay. I'll give Exit 8 a 6 out of 10. I thank you so much for watching, and remember, come back anytime!